I never imagined that my own brother could become the source of my deepest nightmares. From childhood, we shared the typical sibling rivalry annoyances, petty fights, teasing, but nothing ever hinted at the darkness that would eventually consume our relationship. It started subtly, with small betrayals I shrugged off, thinking perhaps it was just his impulsive nature. But as the years went by, those small acts escalated, revealing a pattern of manipulation, envy, and calculated malice that shook me to my core. The first major crack appeared when he began meddling in my personal life. I had always been private about my relationship with my wife, but somehow he knew just when to appear, to make a joke, to twist words, to plant seeds of doubt. At first, it was harmless enough, or so I told myself, but the unease grew with each encounter. Friends started noticing my irritation. My wife noticed it too, and slowly, tension built like a storm waiting to break. Then came the day that changed everything. I had been working late, exhausted from a project that consumed weeks of my energy, when I got a call from my wife. Her voice trembled, a mixture of fear and disbelief, and she told me something I will never forget. My brother had crossed every line imaginable. He had seduced her while I was at work. I remember feeling the world tilt, a sense of nausea mixing with disbelief. How could someone so close, someone I had trusted all my life, do this to me? How could he betray not just me, but the very bond of family we supposedly shared? In the days that followed, the tension in our home became unbearable. I wanted answers, confrontations, closure, but each attempt to speak with him ended in excuses, lies, or more manipulation. He played the role of the innocent, the misunderstood, as if the chaos he created was somehow my fault. Friends who tried to mediate were drawn into arguments I never wanted, making me question whether anyone could truly see the depth of his deception. The betrayal didn't stop there. Soon, it became painfully clear that my wife was pregnant, a reality that brought with it a complex swirl of emotions. Shock, anger, heartbreak, and an impossible mix of betrayal and concern consumed me. I felt trapped in a nightmare where the lines between love, loyalty, and familial duty blurred into something unrecognizable. Nights were sleepless, days were tense, and every interaction with him became a reminder of what he had done. I tried to focus on my own life, on repairing the cracks in my marriage, on creating space for healing. But he didn't leave it at emotional destruction. He thrived on it. Rumors circulated, hints were dropped, whispers of my wife's betrayal, and my friend's loyalty tested. It was as though he were building a house of cards on the foundation of my suffering, waiting for the final collapse. And then came the ultimatum I never expected. Our parents, who had always seemed impartial, suddenly took sides. They discovered the extent of his recklessness, his lies, and his inability to take responsibility. The moment they disowned him was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it confirmed that the rift in our family was irreparable. Liberating because finally there was justice, albeit incomplete and bittersweet. It was in the wake of this family upheaval that I learned about the inheritance. $2 million left to me, nothing to him. A symbol of parental trust in the one who had survived his chaos with integrity intact. Part of me felt relief, security, a chance to rebuild what had been shattered. Another part of me wrestled with guilt and the nagging question: did money make me the villain in his eyes? Did it now make me the target of his manipulations in a new, more desperate form? The next time I saw him, he was different. The arrogance that had defined him now seemed thin, almost desperate. There was a pleading in his eyes that had never been there before. He asked for help, not apologies, not friendship, but help, the kind only I could give. A part of me wanted to walk away, leave him to the consequences of his own choices. But another part, buried deep, remembered the brother I had once trusted, the shared childhood memories, and the idea that perhaps, somehow, there might still be a path to redemption. Every conversation with him became a test of patience and morality. He spun stories of hardship, of mistakes that he claimed he had learned from, of loneliness in the wake of parental rejection. Yet, the shadow of his betrayal was never far. Every word he uttered carried a weight, a reminder of the lines he had crossed, the life he had disrupted, the family he had almost destroyed. I began to keep a journal, documenting each encounter, each emotional reaction, each strategy he employed. It was therapeutic, yes, but also a stark reminder of the psychological war I had been forced into. My days revolved around calculating responses, anticipating manipulations, and trying to protect my own family from further harm. Each step felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm carved by betrayal, temptation, and moral ambiguity. And yet, amid all the chaos, I found moments of clarity. I realized that the path forward was not just about vengeance or avoidance. It was about reclaiming my life, setting boundaries, and understanding that forgiveness, if it ever came, would not be dictated by him, but by me. This insight became my compass, guiding me through the murky waters of family drama, betrayal, and unexpected inheritance. Little did I know that these lessons, hard-earned and painful, were only the prelude to a confrontation that would test every ounce of my judgment, courage, and moral conviction. My brother's plea for help was more than a request. It was the catalyst for a reckoning I had long anticipated but never imagined would arrive in such a complicated, heart-wrenching form. The inheritance changed everything. Overnight, the dynamics within my family shifted, revealing not only my brother's desperation, but also the subtle fractures I hadn't noticed before. Suddenly, relatives who had been distant, acquaintances who had feigned neutrality, and even old friends began approaching me with veiled curiosity, some with outright envy. $2 million is a lot of money, enough to inflame tensions, spark opportunism, and test loyalties, and I felt every eye on me as if I carried not only wealth, but also judgment. At first, I thought I could handle it with discretion. I made no grand announcements, kept conversations vague, and tried to shield my wife and myself from the drama that seemed to follow like a storm cloud. But secrecy has its limits. People sense money, and where money exists, whispers follow. My brother, disowned and humiliated, became the center of my anxiety. He sent messages, calls, emails, even occasional visits, all dripping with the same blend of guilt, manipulation, and veiled threats. He painted himself as a victim of circumstance, of my parents' harshness, of life itself, leaving me to wrestle with a confusing mix of anger, sympathy, and suspicion. I remember one night, long after my wife had gone to sleep, staring at my phone and reading a message that made my chest tighten. I need your help. You're the only one who can save me from losing everything. The words themselves seemed innocent enough, but I knew the gravity behind them. He wasn't asking for charity or forgiveness. He was asking for a lifeline, one I wasn't sure I could provide. I sat there for hours, drafting a response, erasing it, rethinking, and finally, doing nothing. Sometimes silence is the loudest reply. Navigating these days required careful calculation, Each encounter with him became a negotiation of boundaries. I had to remind myself constantly that while he had been reckless, I was the one responsible for maintaining the stability of my own family. My wife noticed my vigilance, and we spent long evenings discussing strategy, ethics, and what it meant to help someone who had caused so much harm. Our conversations were both practical and philosophical. How much responsibility do we owe to those who betray us? Can we separate the act from the actor, or must every transgression define the person forever? The public side of the inheritance brought its own complications. Extended family members suddenly became vocal about their expectations. Subtle or not so subtle hints that I should share, distribute, or invest in ways that benefited the family collectively. I realized quickly that the money was more than just financial security. It was a mirror reflecting the ambitions, resentments, and moral failings of those around me. Every interaction became a test, a moral puzzle demanding careful thought and emotional resilience. And yet, even in this storm, there were moments of introspection that I had never allowed myself before. I considered what the inheritance symbolized beyond the money. It was trust. It was validation. It was a reminder that my parents had seen me as someone worthy of responsibility, capable of navigating challenges with integrity. This perspective helped me reframe my anger at my brother. Yes, he had wronged me in the most personal ways possible, but his missteps did not define the entirety of my life. The inheritance was not just wealth. It was a lesson in resilience, prudence, and ethical judgment. One afternoon, my brother appeared at my doorstep without warning. His presence was awkward, hesitant, almost pitiable. He didn't storm in demanding money or favor. He merely sat and began recounting the difficulties he had faced since being disowned. His tone was carefully measured, the kind that felt rehearsed but sincere, as if he knew the lines he had to deliver to elicit a specific response. I listened, silent but alert, noticing the subtle ways he tried to sway emotion, to tug at guilt, to remind me of our shared history. Every word was a test, and every pause a calculated move to see if I could be manipulated. During that conversation, he brought up memories of our childhood laughing in the backyard, supporting each other through school projects. Moments of camaraderie that felt distant but real. He used nostalgia as a tool, a way to humanize himself in my eyes, and I felt the tug of long-suppressed emotions. I remembered the boy who had once been my partner in mischief, my confidant, and I struggled to reconcile that memory with the man who had caused so much pain. But the practical side of me prevailed. I had to assess the risks, the potential consequences of any action I took. Helping him meant more than handing over money. It meant responsibility for his decisions, exposure to potential scams, and, most dangerously, opening the door to further betrayal. I realized that forgiveness, if it came, had to be measured, conditional, and aligned with principles rather than emotion. I could help, but on my terms, and only if it did not compromise the safety and stability of my family. I decided to set boundaries. Assistance would be structured, monitored, and limited. I made it clear that any help would come with accountability. Financial plans reviewed together, obligations clearly stated, and expectations transparent. I watched closely for any attempt to manipulate, exaggerate, or exploit, determined not to be drawn into another cycle of destruction. My brother, sensing the limits, shifted tactics. He moved from direct pleading to subtle persuasion, from appeals to sentimentality to strategic offers of cooperation. It was a psychological chess game. and I had to think several moves ahead at all times. Despite the tension, the situation also forced me to reflect on human complexity. My brother was not entirely evil. He was broken, impulsive, and morally compromised, but still human, capable of reflection, regret, and even growth. The inheritance had not made him worse, but it had revealed his true character when faced with rejection and desperation. Observing him, I learned lessons about resilience, empathy, and the difficult balance between compassion and self-preservation. Through it all, I relied heavily on my wife. She became my sounding board, my conscience, and my anchor. Together, we navigated the ethical minefield of helping someone who had once betrayed us, balancing mercy with justice, trust with caution, and the past with the possibilities of redemption. These conversations were painful but necessary, helping me clarify my intentions and reinforcing the idea that the inheritance was not just a sum of money, it was a measure of trust, judgment, and responsibility that I had to honor. No matter how complicated the circumstances became, the days turned into weeks. Each encounter with my brother revealing new facets of his personality and new challenges to my resolve. I learned to read his motives carefully, to distinguish between genuine need and manipulative strategy, and to maintain a moral compass in a situation that constantly tempted me toward anger, vengeance, or rash decisions. In the crucible of inheritance and betrayal, I discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed, and a clarity about my values and limits that would shape every decision to come. The day finally arrived when confrontation was unavoidable. My brother, emboldened by weeks of subtle testing and veiled pleas, came to me one afternoon with a determination I hadn't seen before. There was urgency in his eyes, a raw mixture of fear and expectation. He didn't waste time with the nostalgic tales or the guilt-laden apologies he had used before. This time, he wanted results, immediate action, and clarity to things I was not yet prepared to give. I invited him in, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, a silent barrier between the past and the decisions that would define our future. For a moment, the tension was almost unbearable. The air seemed thick with years of betrayal, pain, and complicated emotions, each waiting to be confronted, dissected, and understood. I studied him carefully. His posture, his tone, the slight twitch of his hand all spoke volumes about the man who had caused so much upheaval in my life. "I need your help," he began, his voice steady but pleading. "I've lost everything. I can't go back to them. You're the only person who can make this right for me." There it was again, the request that had haunted me for weeks. But this time, it carried more weight. It wasn't just desperation. It was accountability, or the lack of it laid bare. I listened quietly, letting him finish, knowing that my response had to be measured, deliberate, and absolute. I reminded him of what he had done, the betrayal of my trust, the violation of my marriage, the chaos he had unleashed on our family. Every word hit like a hammer. There was no room for denial or minimization. I wanted him to understand that consequences were inevitable, that forgiveness was not automatic, and that any hope of help came with stringent conditions. The magnitude of his misdeeds could not be ignored, and the clarity of their impact had to be acknowledged. Yet, even as I spoke, I realized that this confrontation was about more than punishment. It was about choice, accountability, and the boundaries I was willing to enforce. I could feel the tension in the room shift as he processed my words, the flicker of recognition that he could not simply manipulate his way out of responsibility. For the first time, I sensed a possibility not just for reconciliation, but for a genuine reckoning that might change him, or at least prevent further harm. "I can help," I said carefully, "but only if you accept responsibility completely. No excuses, no blame, and no further betrayal. You will follow the plan, step by step, or there will be no assistance at all." My words were firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The inheritance and the trust it represented were not tools for manipulation. They were instruments of accountability, a chance for him to prove his character through action, not words. He nodded, almost reluctantly, a flicker of hope and desperation intertwining in his expression. It was the first moment I sensed that he truly understood the stakes. He was no longer appealing to nostalgia, guilt, or manipulation. He was facing a path that required genuine effort, humility, and moral responsibility. For the first time, the possibility of transformation seemed tangible. Even if tenuous, over the next several weeks, we established a structured plan. Financial assistance was contingent on clear actions, therapy sessions to address his behavior, accountability checks to ensure honesty, and steps to repair relationships he had damaged. Every interaction was monitored, every commitment verified. It was not easy. Each day brought tests of patience, moments of frustration, and reminders of the past chaos. Yet, I remained steadfast, knowing that consistency and boundaries were crucial to the possibility of genuine change. Meanwhile, my wife became an essential ally. Her support, insight, and perspective helped me navigate the complex ethical terrain. She reminded me that helping him was not about absolution or reconciliation alone. It was about protecting our family, enforcing moral standards, and modeling accountability. Together, we reinforced the importance of boundaries, ethics, and careful oversight. Her wisdom reminded me that forgiveness could coexist with caution, that assistance could be given without compromising our safety or values. As weeks turned into months, I began to notice subtle changes in my brother. He demonstrated accountability in small, measurable ways, attending therapy, following through on commitments, and cautiously rebuilding trust. It was neither swift nor flawless, but the cracks of resistance began to give way to tentative progress. Each success, each honest interaction, felt like a fragile victory, a reminder that even the most broken paths could find light with careful guidance. Yet, I remained vigilant. I knew that forgiveness was not linear, that past betrayal casts long shadows over trust, and that any misstep could undo progress. The inheritance, once a source of tension, became a tool of structure and consequence, a framework for testing commitment, discipline, and moral growth. I realized that helping him was not a simple act of charity, was an ongoing exercise in judgment, patience, and ethical clarity. Finally, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across our home, I saw him reflectively sitting, no longer pleading or defensive, but contemplative. The man before me was not the one who had caused chaos, but someone beginning to navigate the consequences of his choices. There was no guarantee of complete redemption, no promise that the past could be erased, but for the first time, I sensed that our relationship could move toward a new equilibrium, defined not by betrayal but by accountability, choice, and the careful application of trust. The confrontation had not been easy, and the path ahead remained challenging. But in that moment, I understood the full weight of responsibility, not just to my family, my wife, and my own conscience. but to the very concept of integrity that our parents had entrusted to me through their inheritance. I had faced the reckoning, set the boundaries, and offered a chance for change. Whether he would seize it fully remained uncertain, but the act of standing firm, defining my terms, and navigating the delicate balance between forgiveness and caution marked the culmination of a journey that had begun in betrayal but could now move toward possibility. In the end, I realized that family, trust, and morality are intertwined in ways that demand courage, patience, and unwavering clarity. My brother's actions had tested me to my limits, but the inheritance, both literal and symbolic, became a lens through which I could measure, act, and ultimately protect what mattered most. Life would never be the same, but in facing betrayal and forging boundaries, I discovered resilience, insight, and the potential for redemption in even the most fractured relationships.